Okay. And we are live once again. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is our last guest of the evening before we go for the free-for-all. Let me introduce my friend Arthur Moyer. Arthur is a very unique individual, so I'm going to let him introduce himself since I can't do you as much justice as you can do yourself.
I can make a comment on that, but I won't. In any case, hello, my name is Arthur Moyer. I have formed and led a magical order or tradition called omnimancer for about 28 years now. One of the lecture I intend to do today is a lecture that I did at a magical convention that I used to run called Crucible. And this particular one, I believe, was from 2012. And it's titled Nature of Magical Energy. Now, to give my own little background about myself, omnimancy in and of itself is more of a scientific way of approaching magic rather than a dogmatic approach. Within magical circles, think of it as thaumaturgy versus theurgy. Theurgy is more magic that is based off of asking spirits to do whatever, be that a deity or a tree spirit or your ancestors or pick whatever. I mean, simple praying technically is theurgy. Thaumaturgy is more that you're doing, think of like old style alchemists, if you will. Not that I'm doing that, but in the sense of, they have a scientific formula and they're putting something together and hopefully they don't blow themselves up, kind of thing. So it means that we do experiments, we figure out what works, what doesn't, what can be improved, and we keep iterating on it. And so over time, we figured out a lot of different things. And I've done lectures at Rutgers and other conventions and different places across the country at one point or another. So that's kind of what prompted, to a certain degree, the convention that I ran. But without further ado, do I actually get any feedback from the audience, or I'm just sort of, hopefully someone actually hears me?
We have listeners, but so far they're being quiet.
Okay, fair enough. Because like I said, this is usually it has an audience behind it.
Well, if you look on your window, you'll see that I can put a raised hand icon up. If somebody has a question, I'll do that, and you'll know. That way, you'll know.
Okay, fair enough. So, without further ado, since I guess no one has any questions about myself or anything else, I have a presentation. So let me get that shared. So, pardon me for a second, and I'll get that going, and I'll get this going. So hopefully you should have a black screen. Now, do you see the titling? Kevin? Hello?
Sorry, I forgot I had to unmute myself. Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, just making sure.
Screen is up.
I didn't know if something crashed or you know how these things go.
I know. Oh, we've had enough problems today. Believe me, I know.
Yeah, just making sure. Okay. So this is Nature of Magical Energy. Admittedly, this is the third of a series of video lectures that I put together way back when. So it's going to rely a little bit on those previous lectures, but we'll see what happens. Since I can't see anything, so raising the hand won't help me, Kevin, so you'll have to mention something that, hey, someone has a question. So, all right, so let's start it up. So energy, as far as magical energy, can be from pretty much anywhere, from like the universe or local nature or, souls of living creatures, as the case may be. We always hear about power coming from living things, so that's nothing new as a concept. So it can be from small chemical reactions like a candle. It can be from more weird reactions like a nuclear reactor or things of that nature. It produces energy. From planetary poles of planets to outright stars. I mean, typically, in a more classical sense, you always hear about people pulling power from the moon or from the star or whatever else. Now, what I'm going to talk about initially is the more classical way of getting energy, which is from oneself. And it's best to explain what's going on and why it works. Now, from the previous lecture, this particular animation was about an individual soul. In this case, the soul reactor, the soul fireball that sort of powers their spiritual guts, if you will. So where all magical power comes from a individual point of view. So this was when I gave the lecture on astrobiology, this was showing sort of a crude way of showing how that energy might be collected within, sort of as organs, if you will. Much like you might have a liver or a stomach or a brain or whatever else, the spirit itself has organs as well, just to kind of give a little background about different things. But everybody's heard about an aura, for example. Well, no one actually says how that's actually created. This is trying to indicate in layman's terms how that actually works. So, all the rest of the stuff was from the previous lecture. But the power emanates from deep within your soul construction, and then it kind of flows all the way forward, much like if you think of blood within your body, it gets oxygenated from your lungs, and then it goes through your body, dropping off oxygen, picking up garbage and stuff like that, and then getting cleansed, through your kidneys and other things, gets food from your small intestines, etc. But it creates one big giant cycle. In this case, it's sort of a one-way cycle where the energy comes out relatively pure, as you see on the right, and then by the time it gets on the way out, it's been very diluted, but it picks up stuff along the way. Now, the problem is that all this energy is... Fortunately, my PowerPoint's being a little twitchy here. There we go. So when someone looks at someone's aura or someone's energy, it just might look like a big puffball. This is all they're really seeing. Is this energy sort of spewing all over the place. They have those kind of magical senses to see it. So the point is that energy does not really exist in normal 3D space. So we think of like the physical part of us, that's 3D space plus time. Now, as any physicist will tell you, or at least quantum physicists, there's a series of alternate particles that, as long as they don't interfere with the current set of particles, we would never know is even there. Neutrinos are kind of, for example, in that little borderline area where they can kind of detect them, but they generally don't interfere with normal matter. But in any case, so if you think from a magical perspective, there are other realms. There are other, dimensions is the wrong word. Dimension has to do with like up, down, left, right, etc. It's become synonymous with other realms, other universes, and it shouldn't be that way. You have to go a different dimension to get there. Meaning up, down, left, right, you will never get to a different universe. But if you go, instead of X, Y, Z, you go W, you can get to a different realm. And so that's what this is supposed to indicate, that kind of overlap. So when you deal with spirits and magical energy, most of the time they're residing in this overlapping universe. And while it can affect the physical universe, it's much more difficult. So it's a day-to-day basis, it's this overlap. So when you're using your magical senses and you're seeing this puff of energy, you have all these different energy sources, whether from the different living things around you, whether it be other people, your cat, trees, whatever. Now, the thing about energy is things have a tendency of attracting itself. So energy attracts itself. Much like water in the air will eventually condense and form rivers, even under the ground. So magical energy does the same thing. The different auras of different people are all constantly intermixing, and they eventually form what we refer to as a ley line, which you may have heard from other magical texts. And those ley lines like to run across different parts of the environment. So you might have it like, one part of it running across the top of a mountain. There'll be one ley line, and another ley line running through the rivers and things of that nature. And when you think of a more pagan aspect of it, they'll say, well, I'm drawing upon the mountains or the earth or something like that. Well, they are, but they do it usually from a more abstract point of view, where I'm like grabbing from the entire Earth, whereas reality is, well, there's a ley line running there, so that's what they're tapping in on. So like I said, omnimancy is more about seeing the specifics rather than generalities. In the end, it may not make a difference, but the more you know about how something works, the more you can manipulate it. That's why we have computers and air conditioners and rocket ships and things of that nature. So the details matter, as far as we're concerned anyway. So I'll skip the introduction of my assistant there, if I can. There we go. So one of the first things that most people end up doing is creating something like an energy ball. And that's something that it's something that they visualize. And you go, okay, well, there are several different ways of creating an energy ball. Now, this is the most simplistic thing you can do. So, I mean, I'm not saying this is the end be-all magic. It certainly is not. This is simply the start of it. Typically, what is done is most people draw the energy from themselves. And while this does work, and it's pretty dense, meaning think of water vapor. You can't drink water vapor that's in the air right now. But if you let it condense on the side of something cold or something else like that, you can drink that liquid. So magical energy is the same kind of way. If the energy is not dense, it's not really usable. So the energy that's from within yourself is already compacted and therefore is usable. The negative is that, well, you kind of need that to run yourself, So your own spirit kind of needs it. Now, that's good enough for, magical workings that are happening, once a month or something else like that. But another way, for example, is to imagine the energy from the environment around and pulling it in. I usually use a visualization similar to this to draw it in like I'm forming a planet or whatever, but it's sort of, again, it's a ball in my hand. Hopefully everybody was able to see those little dots on their screen. So the idea here is that now, instead of pulling from yourself, you can do it a couple of times, you can pull from the environment all day, but your more immediate vicinity obviously will get drained down. So we have a workaround. So we were talking about ley lines before. You can literally close your eyes and tell yourself to see, okay, I want to see what power sources that I can draw upon that I won't get in trouble for, but that are local for me to use. And you can tell yourself, I just want to have them appear as bonfires in the distance. And of course, I'm skipping something because I haven't done this lecture in a while. So the part that I was also mentioning here with this little tube here is generally when you have a spell, whether it be an energy ball or something else, it's still attached to in one sense or another. Usually you're maintaining it. So this is what we refer to as either will tether or maintenance tether. So your own force of will is maintaining that ball and being there. As soon as that gets cut or you lose interest, it just disappears away. So when you actually create something, you actually have to tell it mentally to stay. And if you don't, it won't stay because it doesn't know any better. It'll go poof. So that's the first thing you do. Is like magic is very literal. So if you tell us like, okay, stay until I say otherwise, there you go. So right now, the energy came from the outside for this particular ball, but your maintenance of it is still coming from you. Now, getting back to those ley lines I was talking about. So now we have these power sources off in the distance. They could be local, they could be next door, they could be miles away. But they are there. Much like water does condense and eventually flow in the creeks and the rivers and eventually oceans, magical energy also flows together. Now, certain nexus points or easier places to tap can show up like these little bonfires in the distance. And so think of creating a garden hose in your hand and then throwing one end of the garden hose at one of these points and then have it automatically hook up. So I'll give you a little demonstration of that. So the idea is that after it hooks up, you have one end of the garden hose plugged in. Now, you can now tell the other end to plug into your spell, or in this case, an energy ball. And then you can tell that spell to be powered off of the energy coming through the tether rather than from anywhere else. And two interesting things happen. one, the spell gets bigger because the back pressure from these power sources are bigger than yourself. And two, you're not powering it, which means it's not going to make you feel lethargic or anything else like that because it's not actually drawing power from you. There's a very minimal amount of power that you're expending to keep the cohesion of the spell, but the main meat of it, the material it's actually made of, is now coming from that ley line. And as you can see, it's much, much larger. Now, the main benefit of this is I've seen this now, and you can use it for obviously for something simple as an energy ball, but it'll work on any spell work that you might have. So if you're worried about, oh, I don't have enough power to juice it up, you do this. Generally, we've seen anywhere from 50% to several-fold increase in efficiency of the spell, meaning it's just got that much more power being pumped into it, therefore it's working better. The other good thing about this is that we didn't have to compact that energy. Much like yourself, this energy was pre-compact, but you're not expending your own vital essence anymore. You're just picking up a natural occurrence of power. And so you can use that for, like I said, pretty much across the board, just powering things that now you don't have to power off yourself anymore. So any questions so far? Not that I've had any questions at all.
Yes, actually, I have a comment.
Sure.
This is from Teresa Hall, Glove City Pagan.
Yep.
Granny taught me to start with my energy first, and as I grew, I learned to draw from animals and earth. I can't remember how old I was when my aunt said the teaching started around 5.
Okay. Well, I mean, I know people will pull from trees or animals or anything else like that, but like anything else, they have a finite amount of energy. The power sources like the ley lines are kind of like a water balloon. So if you've ever taken a little pinprick on a water balloon, it wants to have this stream of water it wants to escape. A river is kind of like that. If you give it another way for the water to go, it will want to go that way. So by providing a little hose like this, it provides its own pumping action into your spell work. But yes, I mean, the problem with like pulling from yourself is, again, you get tired. It's a good starting point. Don't get me wrong. Your own energy is the energy that you're going to be most attuned to, by definition. The problem is it's a finite resource. So as you get further and further along, and you outgrow the limitations of your own power, then what do you do? Now, maybe in the tradition you have, that's not really an issue. But as a magician, doing thaumaturgy, we want to grab more and more power as time goes on, and so living vessels as a power source becomes its own limitation. But that's our perspective of it. But for normal, you don't necessarily have to go the power route like we did. So getting things from trees or animals or even yourself honestly does work. It is a means of doing things. The bigger problem I'm more concerned about using your own power is how often you get a quote-unquote backlash from a spell because it was underpowered. I mean, you hear that a lot in certain pagan circles that something failed because it didn't have the juice behind it. Well, this solves that problem. So, like I said, experiment with it. If it works for you, great. If not, it's just a lecture. Yeah.
Yeah, she comments as well that she lives on the Tennessee River.
Okay. And like you said, that's probably a very good power source right there. There's probably a lot more around than just the river, to be honest.
I would assume there's got to be a ley line or two in the area.
Oh, there's tons of them. They're all over the place. And they come in like small ones between blades of grass and giant ones like arc through the sky. So they're all over the place. So trust me, it's not that hard to come across them. You just got to lock in on them, if you know what I mean. As far as what's out there, my recommendations, again, you specify the ones that you're not going to get in trouble for tapping in on. There's no point in getting the local spirits pissed off at you because you just grabbed their meal. It's like, I got my McDonald's and that guy over there just stole it. What? So if you specify that, the ones that will cause you problems won't show up. And you don't want to have those power sources being people or entities. I will specify that as well. Because again, if you run up to someone, hook up a straw to their arm, and start sucking on it, they're consider it an attack. It's one of those things. So by saying no entities, so that means spirits too, as well as humans and such, it kind of again it leaves you from trouble that might actually happen because you may not be aware of what you're pulling on. Also, don't pull on other people's spell work. That can kind of piss them off too. It's like, wow, look at that really shiny shield. Oops. Well, let me get rid of that. And so that can end up causing problems too. So like I said, there's a lot of disclaimers about what you should pull upon, but there are things out there you can. And there's plenty out there, trust me on that one. Especially in Tennessee. I mean, you got a lot of life going on down there. You know, let's call it what it is. So in any case, that's ley lines. And my mouse is doing this thing. There we go. So the next concept that we were doing was a concept. It's sort of how we end up doing magical targeting, if you will. You always think about, oh, you need someone's picture, their name, or nail or hair clipping, or whatever. We kind of do soul-to-soul linking. And if you think about it, anybody you've interacted with, at some point in space and time, there's that interaction. So Kevin and I have not seen physically for a long time, but there was a point in space-time that I was actually around him. So whether he likes it or not, I have a magical lock on him. That's true of anybody I've met in my entire life. And so what's interesting is I call this what I refer to as relationship tethers. And if you notice in the upper left, or in the middle left, I should say, there's one of the tethers that's sort of blinking. So you say, okay, I want to get magically to my sister's, well, that's not going to say, my girlfriend's mother. You know, sister's mother's kind of pointless. Who you've never met, let's say. And so you can actually sort of envision the person that you do know and go, okay, I want to trace to their mother because they said they were sick and I want to cast a healing spell on them. But the problem is you never met them or anything else like that. Well, what you can do is you can kind of go to them astrally. And the way you kind of get there is you sort of envision them, you see all these lines coming off them, and you say, okay, make the one that's going to the mother in this case highlight. And you have it blink, for example. So once you start following that, you tell yourself, take yourself to the end. Otherwise, you'll be there forever. And when you get there, you can then bounce off of that person from there to a different person. Now, the problem is that when you grab onto a different link and you're going to someone who's magically active, they might have defenses on themselves. So you have to be a little careful. So when you tell yourself go to the end, don't go fully to the end. Like usually stop at like a few hundred yards or a few miles out, if you will, or else you're sort of like right up in their face and they might set off their own defenses in one sense or another. It's also kind of rude to appear right in someone's face and going, "Hi, you don't know me," but you know, kind of like you're in a bar and someone decided to get in your space, you get kind of pissed off at them. So respect people's space. So again, know who you're trying to go to, etc. But this can also be a way if you're trying to verify if someone has spell work on them that shouldn't, and you go to them astrally and you see wacky stuff like this going on them, it's like, oh, well, someone's messing with them. But that's through your own observations. So in any case, there's that. So the next slide is, okay. Now we're going to talk about this concept that omnimancers use, which is called tech. Now, what you've seen before up to now was what we refer to as raw will, which is simply taking raw will, forming energy. All right. And so the analogy I always end up using is think about trying to dig a pool in your backyard. So you want to build this like 10 by 20 foot pool that's like maybe, I don't know, 5 feet deep. So technically, as you just saw her do, you could get in the ground, put your hands in the dirt, and you can pull out the dirt. And in the end, it's not very efficient. And the only way you're going to get any better at it is if you grow stronger. All right. So that's raw will in its purest form. When we're talking about magical use, which is what you saw up to this point. The other thing is you can use a simple machine. In this case, to complete the analogy, would be a shovel. Now you can put a handle on the shovel, you can put foot things on the shovel, you can change the blading, you can curve the edge, but in the end, it's still a machine, but it's a simple lever, simple machine. But the end is still driven by your own personal strength. Now, from magical perception, you might call them constructs or thought forms. They have different names, but in the end, that's what you're doing. Is you're creating a simple machine to multiply as a force multiplier against your normal raw will, which is your raw strength. Now, omnimancer uses a concept called tech, and it's more equivalent to manifesting a backhoe. And so you have everything from metallurgy to hydraulics to electronics to a whole bunch of other different things, all combined together. So you're throwing a few switches, and all of a sudden this giant backhoe comes down and munches up that hole really quick. And that's just a study of science. I mean, think about, again, if you have a smartphone, you have a supercomputer in your pocket, so we all look at cats. I mean, think about how many billions of dollars it would have been worth in the 1970s or 1960s. It would have been impossible to imagine. It would be something from space aliens or something, So tech is, instead of actual just sort of raw energy just hanging around like a ball, it's actually formed. Now, if you think of a car engine, all the parts that are in your car are shaped and of the material that they are for a very specific purpose. So the engine's, has pistons, it has spark plugs, it has a whole bunch of different things in it, and it all combines together to make a workable car. Now, the whole idea of tech, again, is that if you go back to the backhoe analogy, you can make the backhoe and then rip all the pieces apart from it, and you can make a go-kart out of it. Or you could rip it apart again and do something else with the other pieces. Tech kind of works like that. So what I was trying to do in this particular lecture was try and explain why does tech work versus just raw will. Raw will is probably best as equivalent to analog versus digital. Digital has its own structure, whereas analog is. Analog can be subdivided down as much as you want it to be, whereas digital can't be. So when you get a digital signal, it's kind of an all or nothing thing. Either it comes through very clear, or it doesn't at all. Whereas analog can come in different levels of clarity. So in any case, so the problem with tech is it's very easy to replicate it, but it's not very easy to describe it. So this is going to get very anal very quickly about how tech works. So this is something as simplistic as we refer to as a G1, which is an amplifier. It's a magical amplifier. And so this is the concept of how it works. So if you take an energy stream, whether it be from a ley line or your own senses or anything else like that, it's much more diffuse. It goes through the spell work. And as you can see, it comes out a lot thicker and a lot denser, which is the point. I mentioned before about how advantageous it is for energy to be more dense. To use a more real-world example, think of like night vision goggles. It takes a little bit of energy, meaning the light of a very dark area, and amplifies the energy so that you can see it in your eyes, so that everything's all grayscale or green scale, as the case may be, but you can see it. It becomes useful. I don't know. So in any case, and so, but you can say, well, that's nice, Arthur. That's a lens or something else like that. It's like, no, this actually operates more equivalent to. You ever see those shredders that they put branches in, where the blades are running and it just sucks it right in and it chops it up just because it pulls part of the nature of what it is pulls it in? Well, that's kind of how this is actually operating. So if you look, these things are creating mini fields, and those fields effectively have teeth, and so it pulls it in, and by nature of it, it draws it in and thickens it because it's no choice. Meaning, if you think about how wire is made originally from a big block of metal, and it's drawn through smaller and smaller dies until you end up with wire. And this is kind of operating on a similar principle, but it's a little more active as far as drawing it through. And you go, okay, well, that's nice and all, but how and why would it even create these fields? Well, if you look, there are a series of those green poles. So let's look closer at one of those poles. All right, there you go. So you sit there and go, okay, well, what am I looking at? Well, everybody's heard when you talk about energy, you have like healing energy or destructive energy or chaotic energy or whatever it might be. And this is kind of amalgam of all of that. But because we're looking at such detail, you can see the energy independent of each other. So if you think of green energy as healing energy, what does healing energy do? It binds things together, if you know what I mean. Whereas, destructive energy breaks things apart, right? So you have that, and then you have these little swirlies. I'm not sure if you see it within the larger tube, but the idea is that by having one rod in the middle and the other rod on the outside, the two force against each other and spin. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. So if we look, there we go, within the outer rod, there are things within the outer rod. So let's look closer at what those things are. There we go. There. So the red energy, the way I'm representing it here, is more chaotic kind of energy. Think of fire, if you will. So that's creating the instability, and that's what you see. That's what's actually creating the jaggies at the outer edge of those wood chippers, if you will. But if you look closely at the tips of it, it has destructive energy right in the middle of it, and that's what's creating the pattern, the block pattern, if you will, in the external field. Now you think about it, this is awfully complicated, Arthur. How the hell are you ever making magic out of something this complicated? Well, there's something else that's pretty complicated if you look at it. You know what that is? Let me get this working. That's your friendly neighborhood kitchen magnet. You didn't need to know the technology of why a magnet works, but yet you can still use it. So omnimancy in tech, you don't necessarily need to be, a rocket scientist to figure it out, or rather to use it. But the details matter. The more you know about how something works, the more you can fiddle with it and then improve upon it. So a lot of these things you have abstract. So literally a lot of times we'll just go, okay, if I have something, I'll sense it with the magical senses, and I just copy it. I refer to that as macro casting. And so you may not understand that it might be a black box to you. But there's a couple rules of spell casting I want to bring across, and these are not like rules in the sense of the universe runs on them. These are rules that you tell yourself. So the first rule, whoops, what am I doing there? There we go. The first rule is you can cancel any spell that you make at any time. Now, what does that mean? Well, I know a lot of students that I've taught, they'll sit there and the first thing they'll do is they'll form a shield around themselves. And I'm going to protect myself and I'm going to make sure it stops everything. And then they're dead tired by about noon. And then they realize, you know what? I probably breathed in energy to a certain point, much like I breathe in oxygen. Maybe I shouldn't have stopped everything. And then they go to take down their shield, and they can't. Because they then put a clause in the stupid thing that let them take it down. So they literally have to attack their own shield, get the thing down. Whereas if we put a clause into the spell work saying you can cancel it at any time, all these crazy movies about love spells and stuff like that having to run their course, guess what? If they put a clause that they can just cancel it, will be a short movie. So literally all you do is tell yourself, okay, from this point forward, any spell I cast, I can cancel at when I feel like it, at will. All right. Second rule is you can modify your spell at any time. Now think of like the amount of effort it takes to get a spell put together. You get all these definitions together, you get it all running, and you really great shield or a really great healing spell or any number of different things. Event manipulation. You're getting a job, a girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. And then when you're done, you go, "Oh my God, I forgot something." Well, I can cancel it and start all over again, which would be a complete pain in the butt. Or if you said at the very beginning, where you said, "Okay, for any spell that I cast from now on can be modified at will by my will," then you don't have to stop it. All you got to do is, okay, I need to change these parameters or add these other things to it. And it prevents you from having to start all over again to recast something that was complicated to make. Now, the beauty of that is that over the years, you can get some very complicated spell work that was simply modifies upon modifies upon modifies that you've done over that period of time. And also, when you, like I said, if we forget something or you get an epiphany that you should have put in that you didn't, well, then there you go. So that's also a very important thing. Now, the last thing is just a personal rule, and that is don't cast while sick. And the main reason for that is the excess energy that your soul produces, that most people use for their magical workings, is for healing the individual body. And so on a normal day-to-day basis, you don't need it, therefore you can use it for magical spell work. The problem is if you got a cold or a flu or some other disease that makes you lethargic, and then you take that energy away from your body to use, you get worse. And while people go, "Well, I'm casting a spell to heal myself." Well, that's kind of like living off of vitamins. The vitamins are there to help you digest the food better. In themselves, they don't provide sustenance. So in the end, your own healing spell is not going to work anywhere near as well as your natural body's ability to heal, unless you get really adept, which good for you then. Generally, it's always better to do something where something augments your healing abilities, your natural healing abilities, rather than replacing it. Now, we do have a workaround for that, as you might well imagine. It's not in this lecture, but it's in a different lecture. So, one of the other amplifiers I wanted to talk about, when we're talking about empowering the individual to be more powerful than a single individual, was I got this as a rune. And this is how it was viewed to me. And I didn't understand, okay, this is how it envisioned to me, but I didn't understand why it worked. So when I started to reverse engineer it, I went, okay, well, this was the runic version of it, which is a symbol of it, but this is actually how it operated. So if you have an energy stream, whether it be your will going out or your senses coming back in, think of an old record player where you would have a needle that would read the grooves in the record to produce sound. So think of that as the part on the left. And the part on the right, you probably recognize as the G1, or that amplifier that we showed you that condensed energy. So now what happens if you have a section that reads energy, and then even there's a section that can write energy? So now you provide it with an energy source, like a local ley line. So now it makes that original stream thicker and denser, as you can see. And then we added, 2 more. And watch what the end result is. All right, that's my phone going off. Well, I apologize. So you can see it's now making that energy stream that much thicker. Now, what we told you at the very beginning of the lecture about thicker, denser streams, they're more usable. So if you have your magical will going out, now your magical will is amplified going out. If you have your senses coming in, now it's like night vision goggles. You can see things you couldn't normally see before because it was too faint to see or notice. And that's where stuff like this comes into play. This is getting into, again, the technical aspects of magical energy, but that's kind of the point. There's the approach where it's kind of infinite, but then there's the approach of, okay, what is happening on a physics kind of level of what's going on, and then how can we use that to our advantage? So this was a simple concept of we have an energy stream coming out, coming in, we're able to wrap it with itself and make that stream much thicker. So, believe it or not, that is the lecture. Usually I have a lot more questions that usually fill it out. But,
yeah, it's been a little slightly quiet.
well, I realized that, this was meant for a, like I said, for Crucible audience, which I knew were a bunch of people who were directly interested in magic and what I was actually trying to talk about. Although a lot of them were more ritual magics types, I'll admit. Whereas obviously there's no ritual with this. And if you notice, there's no spirits in this either. It's using your own personal energy or what's naturally occurring and using that to enhance what you're able to do. I have other lectures showing you how to develop magical senses, how the spiritual body's put together, so you can, get like 9 hours of sleep on the actual 2 or 3 hours of sleep, for example. That's helpful for people with newborn babies, let me tell you, or college students when they're.
Good Lord, could I use that?
What's that?
Say, good Lord, could I use that?
Well, I mean, like I said, these things are all about practical uses. It's not just about, it's when you're talking about something like pagan magic as a general rule, usually it's used as a means of worship. Omnimancy is used as a means of actually, accomplishing things. Not that you can't get things accomplished with. Not that you can't get things accomplished with, pagan magic and other forms of magic. It's a matter of what is its primary purpose. Omnimancy's primary purpose is to get practical things accomplished. Theurgy is generally used for worship and occasionally used to accomplish something. But there's a focus difference. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a focus difference.
I'll say that Teresa, our resident pagan, actually says, and I quote, "I'm drinking it in. I find it fascinating." So at least have one person who's finding something interesting here. And I always find your lectures interesting, even if, to be completely honest, since I'm not a magician, some of it tends to fly over my head.
Well, it's fun. Like I said, this was the third in the series, so it's a little bit based upon some other things. But I think I bring up those other ones too, but I think we're kind of running out of time even in that case.
Yeah, we're getting on towards the last thing of the evening before we call it a night, which is going to be the general chat free-for-all, where everybody from throughout the day is welcome to come back and interact. And I have a friend of mine who runs another YouTube channel who may or may not drop in.
Okay, fair enough.
Particularly, I'd like the friend in question, I'd love to have you and him chat, because I think the two of you would find each other fascinating.
Fair enough.
Not sure you'd agree with each other on much of anything. I think you'd find each other. He's agnostic, generally skeptical, and former nuclear engineer for the Navy.
Okay. No, I mean, it's like anything else. The problem is I'm some schmuck on the internet. I've given lectures for decades now, and in person I do well, if that makes sense, because I can demonstrate it. On the net, these are more meant to be concepts of take this back to your own magical practice and see how well it applies for it. For a general 101 audience who goes, well, I've heard of magic, that kind of thing. How does this apply to me? This kind of lecture isn't quite for that. I remember actually having a lecture at Rutgers one time, and I had my students break up and sort of mention how to make an energy ball or something simplistic and stuff like that, just a starter thing. And I think the most satisfying thing that I had was some guy was in the back, and he was with one of my students, and it was a small group, and he stood up and yelled, "Holy shit, this stuff is real!" And he ran from the room. I went, "Yes," because he felt it.
Yeah.
He ended up making a ball, and then he felt it in his hand, and it was like, there's nothing there, but I feel it. And he freaked out. And I've had freakouts, and I have to admit that's part of the reason why I teach. I love seeing the mixture of absolute terror and actual excitement at the same time when they get that, this stuff is actually
real.
Yeah. And so that's fun for me. You know.
Oh no, I can understand that. I've seen it doing EVPs and then playing them back for people, or seeing, especially when you get some of the better ones that have been played back that Lou used to get because he got them everywhere, and just having people completely lose their shits.
Right. Well, we've been taught since we're little that, spirits aren't real and magic isn't real, and the people who do it are just like, kind of wonky. I'll admit that the problem, and I know I'm going to get flack for this, but partially depends on why you're into the magic in the first place. Are you on some sort of power trip? That's not really helpful. Are you the most powerful magician in the multiverse living in your parents' basement? You probably think you are. A lot of magicians self-nerf themselves, but people self-nerf themselves, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
They're believing their own BS. The advantage of a group that can observe what you're doing, whether you're starting out or further up, at least they can ground you. They can sit there and go, well, that's not my observation. I remember when I was doing that seance thing when the old father was still around. And, he was actually sitting there and he's like, well, we're bringing in the spirit and stuff like that. It's like, I didn't sense anything there. And I was kind of like upset about it because sort of like, well, now you're putting my reputation over what's obviously meant to be a kind of like a smoke and mirrors kind of situation. Because I didn't sense anything there.
And I apologize for that. It was meant. There was definite miscommunication.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, it was a matter of, because you take spirits seriously. I definitely do. And then was sort of like, spirits actually ring the bells. Like, no, there's nothing there. And I didn't want to be that person.
Yeah.
But I talked to you afterwards about. I was like, no, I don't want to do that again. That's not how I'm trying to represent myself. This is a joke to me.
Which is perfectly fair. And I am going to do some spirit and psychic related magic tomorrow, but that's going to be tomorrow morning. And I've made pains when I introduced you, and I'll make pains in the morning to make clear what I'm doing is stage magic. It's not meant to be. I'm not summoning actual spirits, for God's sakes.
We can do that if you want.
Oh, I know we could. Well, depending on who we get and the feelings, I have my gizmos here. I'd love to try to do some EVP and see if we can summon up any dead people.
I see dead people. Yeah. And by the way, it's overrated. Dead people.
Well, I mean, just my own experience. Like, yeah, I've seen ghosts. It's once you've seen enough of them, it's not, even when you're not psychic, as you know, I'm the psychic rock, but it's not that exciting on the 20th or 30th time. It's like, okay, you're a ghost. I see you. Hi.
Well, like I said, I mean, it's not the movies. It's more a matter of kind of how anime treats it, I guess, in the sense of not in the sense of the crazy fights and stuff like that, but in the sense of they're kind of everywhere, but they don't really do anything. They're kind of just like right now. There are probably hundreds of thousands of mites in the room and on you and all the rest of that stuff. There's bacteria everywhere. Hell, we're hiding from a certain virus. Let's call it what it is. But you don't see it. But it's there. We know it's there. So it's that kind of thing. So when you're talking about spirits, there's lots of them around. It doesn't really matter. The only ones you really concern yourself with are the ones that actually want to cause problems. Other than that, you could care less. The ones that actually want to help you, of course, you're appreciative that they're there. But again, that's usually can't say, hey, it was because of them. So it's one of those things. I don't like to use spirits for my magic simply because spirits are kind of like a horse. You ride a horse and they can be very useful. But if they get freaked or they decide to do something you didn't ask them to do, they're going to do it anyway, whether you want them to or not. Yeah. And then what the hell do you do? And so I'd rather know what I am doing and then do it myself rather than ask a spirit to do it in the hope that it understood it, doesn't want to try to teach me a lesson, or really just can't relate. And so the things I'm leaving out, it takes a different direction that I didn't think it should, but it didn't see anything wrong with it. There are a lot.
Genies and wishes, for
Oh, yeah.
example.
What's that?
I said the classic genies and wishes, and how you interpret the wording.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this with certain things when you start getting the spirits, you end up becoming kind of an actual lawyer because you gotta really define things and be very, very detailed. That happens with spell work too. Spell work is very, very literal, or at least the kind of stuff that we do, and your mind fills in the blanks. I remember I was teaching somebody, and I was teaching something simple, but hooking up like a tether to energy, for example. And when I went to look, my own symbology saw snakes. And I went, what the hell are you doing? It's like, well, I'm just hooking up to the thing. It's like, okay, what was your thought process? It's like, well, I'm extending out this hose, and then he literally used his hand and went like this, and I have it latched right into it. Oh, there's my sponge. So stuff like that, where it's sort of like, why am I seeing snakes biting things? And that's why, because he filled in the gaps. That's how he envisioned it in his own mind, and so that translated out. That's the thing about magic. If you don't specify it, your own imagination will kind of fill in the blanks. That could be good or could be bad.
That just leads me to the obvious question. Had you had it up to here with these MRFing snakes on this MRFing magic?
Yeah, snakes on the plane, but fortunately, it hasn't been that bad, obviously.
I had to say it.
Yeah, no,
I didn't think it had been.
As a general rule, stuff works out relatively well for me. You know me well enough these days.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's not perfect, and then you figure out what you screw up, and you go, "Oh, that's so stupid." From my perspective, magic's like programming. If you typo something or do whatever, something goes in a different way you really wanted it to go, and then you got to debug it. It's like, oh man, that's just so stupid. I should have known better than that, and then you fix it. It's kind of like that. But and again, that gets back to when you're talking about entities. You could do everything right, and they could decide that no, I'm going to interpret it the way I feel like interpreting it, and then do their own damn thing. So, from my perspective, by removing them from that loop, at least the scripts are on me rather than them deciding that they want to do their own thing. And besides,
this was extremely logical to me.
Well, think of it this way: if you petition a deity to do something, they're going to spend a certain amount of effort to do it, but not a hell of a lot. You, because it matters to you, you're going to spend all your effort to do it. So the question is all your effort more powerful than a deity's, here's my pinky toe, I'll like half do it, whatever. And I'm not saying deities can't be useful for knowledge, because they are. And that's kind of my view of it, but I wouldn't ask a deity to do something for me because I wouldn't want to owe it anything. And by the same token, I wouldn't want the reinterpretation issue that might come. Or then going, well, you really shouldn't be doing this. I'm not going to tell you that, so I'm going to teach you a certain lesson with this. And sort of like, yeah, no, I'd rather not. Thank you.
I'm just thinking of the one story you have about the guy who burned his house down.
Oh, yes. Well, he's still around for this thing. So for those who don't know that particular story, and he's very proud of this, mind you. So he was short of money. And so he cast a spell for money, and he summoned in some demon to do it because he was a Christian magician. And the manifestation was his house burned down. The insurance claim was such that he was able to get a new house and replace the furniture and net like $16,000. Now, mind you, he had to go through all the horror of losing all his worldly possessions, going through the problems of finding new stuff and all the rest of that stuff, etc. So it wasn't like, something else happens, And so the net result was, yes, he got more money out of it, but was the experience worth it? So that's a personal point of view. I remember. Are you still there, Kevin? You're kind of frozen. I guess he's frozen. Well, in any case, so like I said, he was very, very proud of what that was. Still talks about it to this day. I'm not sure if I consider that a success, I guess it's a success in certain circles, but there it is. And he's back. Okay.
Yep.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, I had a hiccup on the internet on my end. It worked perfectly all day. I can't complain that much.
No, that's true. That's good. I mean, how well am I coming through?
I haven't had a problem with you until you suddenly got muted and everything went sideways a minute ago.
Yeah, you kind of, you froze.
Yep.
And I kept talking, and then sort of like, whoops, okay. Bueller, yeah.
Oh, and I see why that happened.
So,
It connected to a Wi-Fi signal in my house. It shouldn't have because of where I'm sitting. It weaker signal.
yeah, that would suck. Now, I remember in my own situation, I'd cast for money because I was getting this house here. And as those of you who get houses know that the lawyers love coming up with last-minute, multi-$1,000 fees out of nowhere. Oh, you have this title fee of this, all these things that they don't tell you at the very beginning so you don't actually have it. These days I tell people, make sure you have like between a $5,000 and $10,000 buffer regardless of what they say, because they will find something that you won't get your house unless you come up with this fee out of nowhere. And so literally I cast something and I went to the front door and there was a letter and it was a check for like $2,500. I went, sweet. Okay. Why did I get this check? Now, there's what I refer to as out-of-system reasons and in-system reasons. Out-of-system reasons was, of course, I cast a spell, I won the money, there it is. Okay, fine. But things don't just go poof. It didn't just like a little imp appear and went, here you go. That's not what happened. There was a series of weird coincidences that made that appear. And I found out later what had happened. I'd worked for a company a few years back by that point. And at the time, being a computer consultant, being coding, was not considered a professional career. So when you think of professional, you think of doctors, lawyers, etc. When they work overtime, they don't get time and a half. But at the time in New Jersey, the laws hadn't caught up yet. I'm not even sure if they still have. But someone had sued my old company because I'd worked a lot of overtime, and they'd billed me a lot of overtime. And so when the IRS went after them, they went through all their back HR logs and see who was owed time and a half from the stuff that they did. So that $2,400 was after taxes. So it's a matter of, so that's where that thing came out of nowhere from. So it's sort of like, okay, so the in-system reason was some guy sued the old company. The IRS made them pay fines and back pay for all the different people that they had as employees. And so it happened to manifest now. Well, that's how magic works. But you see what I mean, though. It went back in time, changed the fiddling things, and there it is. That's magic. Magic does not care about time. We care about time as humans. Magic goes, I don't care. Sort of like weather manipulation, things of that nature. Obviously, you're not sitting there grabbing clouds, something had to happen beforehand, but I mean, the end result is what you want it to be. Which, again, until you see it, is anecdotal. I realize that. It's much more interesting when you see this stuff manifest, and it's like, well, this could not have happened any other way. Then you actually, okay, this stuff is weird. Why does this work? Oh my God, that kind of stuff. Interestingly enough, I know they've done scientific things with like clairvoyance and things like that since the 70s and 60s, for example. And what was interesting was, I don't know what she meant my word now. What was interesting was the people who believed that this stuff was real actually got results, meaning got statistically anomalous results saying that something's going on. Whereas when it got peer reviewed, it got the straight, law of averages, law of randomness, if you will. And then this one did an aggregate of all these different researches and these different trials. And basically, it came down to that the actual testers, not that they faked the data or they did anything different or anything else like that, what became a factor. That the people who ran the test and their attitude towards it mattered. So they even did a test where they had, someone they alluded to change out who actually ran the test. So then they brought in someone who's like, okay, here's a believer in psychic kind of phenomena and things of that nature. They ran it and they got the anomalies. And then they had someone who was a diehard skeptic and it became straight random statistics. And same equipment, same people, same everything else, they changed the researchers. So it wasn't like they were fudging. It's a matter of so now the observer becomes the problem or becomes another variable in the mix, which is kind of interesting.
It is.
So, but if you think about it, the concept of, you want to have one fun and want to break your head about like causality, look up the delayed quantum eraser experiment. All right. Where they actually can change stuff on a particle level back in time at this point. And the thought experiment came up in the 60s. And they have like full-on animations of how this works and stuff like that and why it works. Well, they don't know why it works. They just know observation.
It works.
And so they didn't have the technology in the 60s to do it, but they do now with electronics the way it is. And it did work, and it's creepy because if you know about how entangled particles are, they go the opposite direction of what the entanglement is. So that's how you can tell what's going on with it. So the problem is that if you think of the typical double slot experiment, if you observe the particles, they act as particles like bullets.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't observe them, they act as waves. So they set up a little thought experiment having a thing where it gets information, loses information. The problem is it was already detected. So by the time the particle was observed, it was already past that point. So how could it be one way or the other? And yet it was working that way still. And that was the problem. So when you're thinking about a lab situation, you're talking about a few feet. The problem is that if you start using, gravitational lensing of galaxies and stuff like that, that means some asshole with a little thing right here on Earth can change the history because that light took 1 billion years to get to you. And then it's changing something in the past.
Oh, good Lord.
That's the repercussions of that. So the universe is a lot stranger when you get down to the quantum level, which is why a lot of musicians are like, oh, it's all quantum. It's like, no, you're just jumping on the bandwagon. There needs to be a bridge science between magic and physics. I do believe it's there. I think some people make the mistake of trying to take magic and fit in the model of Newtonian physics, and it just doesn't. And trying to approach it that way, you're spinning your wheels a lot. My point of view is like, well, let's become so powerful on the magical end to make it very obvious on the physics end. At the very least, if you fail, at least you became powerful, right? So that's kind of my own personal point of view. I know there is an overlap. I just don't know what it is. I've actually bought some scientific equipment a while back, like that one thermometer that measures down to a degree Fahrenheit. I can get reliable results out of it. So I can actually, it'll detect magic or not and whatever, but you know what? It's not impressive with 1,000th of a degree. I'm sorry, it's just not. People want to see fireballs and lighting candles and blowing up cars because of all the movies. That's not impressive. So I don't know what the interaction is. All I know is detecting it and it's reliable, but it's also pointless. Sort of like the whole thing we're talking about sensing spirits. It's sort of like, yeah, after like 20 or 30 of them, it's no big deal. It's like, yeah, it's neat that I did it, but it's completely impractical.
I think this is a very good time to end this and set up for the free-for-all since we're now into general chat.
Yes.
So I'm going to end this stream and I'm going to actually end the Jitsi session so I can start a fresh one just to avoid having the issues we've had through the day.
Not a problem.
Folks, listening to me on YouTube, please stay tuned. We're going to have a brand new video in a second. Hopefully Arthur will be kind enough to join us and some of our other guests from throughout the day. Maybe he'll chime in too. and we'll definitely be open for chat and conversation with people in chat. I myself am also going to be having a beer to celebrate the fact I think this went very well. But we'll be back in a moment, so sit tight. Thank you, folks, and thank you, Arthur, for joining us.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure.